so today the plan is that we're going to be talking about basically 5 critical steps that you should be looking to do, whatever your project, whatever your site. If you are working on improving a digital experience, whatever it is, then these are 5 things that you can do to jumpstart the growth of that digital experience. So yeah, really excited to share this with you today. Let's see. So here are the 5 steps that we're going to be covering today. So first one is the power of empathy. Now I know it doesn't sound very sexy, might sound a little bit boring, but it's actually some interesting stuff here which we take for granted. So this is going to be really interesting. The second part is finding the biggest hole in your leaky bucket. It's going to be interesting. We're going to talk about buckets and we're going to talk about treasure maps. So that's going to be interesting. Yeah, the third is we're going to look at some of my tips on how to analyze your key pages. And then finally, we're going to look at how to survey, like what are the keys to do real kick-ass surveys so that you can get the big picture. I'm going to share with you some of my secrets from the last 15 years of doing this. And finally, obviously, because everyone wants a quick win, in the end, I'm going to share with you some of the quick wins that I've had over my career. So some of these things that you can just go and do straight away right after this webinar. Great thing. So first off, who am I? For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm very passionate about UX and marketing, and I ended up specializing in CRO. And I've done hundreds, if not thousands, of tests across loads of sites. So I've been lucky enough that many crazy site owners gave me their trust to allow me to do tests. But we've had very big successes together, very big wins, and we've always had losses, right? So, and that's the whole point of when you're doing testing. You want to learn from both the wins and the losses. And more recently, over the last 2 years, I'm the CEO and founder of Hotjar, which is now used over 200,000 sites, and we've grown to 7 million euros in ARR in just 2 years. So again, some of the things that we're going to look at here are things that we use a lot at Hotjar ourselves. So to give some context as to why we're talking about specifically these 5 items, I wanted to share a little bit with you my evolution during these 15 years, right? So I started off in the very beginning of my career focused on the style of certain elements, right? The color of a button, its size and position, how big is the image and whatnot. So this was like the very first stage at which I was testing. And maybe some of you might identify with this stage, right? Now, obviously you can get wins, but these are called the low-hanging fruit, right? It's something that you can get a very quick win, but it doesn't even last very long. And I saw a very interesting quote by someone who said, like, you can pick low-hanging fruit, but eventually the branch will break. And this is kind of what happened to me, which is there is a limit to how much you can optimize button size and position, and the impact it will have on your organization is very limited. It's just these quick, low-hanging fruit. Then I moved on to do layout and multivariate testing. This was quite some time ago, so multivariate testing was very sexy. So it's this idea of you introduce a lot of different variations and you let basically the algorithm decide which is the best match. And this worked for us, but it didn't work for very long because there's a limit to how much you can do layout changes, and multivariate testing is very, very time consuming. And the quality of the result is always dependent on the quality of what you put in. And just because you're putting in so many different variations, it tends to be, let's say, less quality and more quantity. From there, I moved on and I discovered, thanks to doing research and meeting very interesting people, the whole concept of copy, right? How to be persuasive in the text you write. And this was the point where also we said, let's focus on velocity. Let's do as many tests as we can. And again, we had some wins, but it didn't last very long. And then comes the final stage, which is where we started to do more user feedback. So these 4 stages are me basically evolving, right? Attending events, speaking to new mentors and discovering new ways to optimize. And this last phase was basically user feedback, speaking to users, asking them questions, and shifting to do less tests and getting bigger wins. So essentially putting much more thought, study, and much more developed hypothesis into a test, and then getting a bigger win. So in essence, less work and bigger ROI. So an example here would be if we identified an area where we need to improve, we would first deploy some polls, ask questions on the page, we'd survey existing customers to see how they feel. We might even do some more detailed ethnographic research, where we might even go meet some of these users, and then basically build out some concepts, see how our users react to them, do some quick user tests, and this ensure that if we're going to commit and invest 4 weeks of traffic into a test, we're pretty much doing the test just to make sure we're not making a big mistake, because we would be very confident we would have a win. So this is kind of the evolution, and a lot of what I'm sharing today is centered into hoping to get you guys more to that fourth step with me, like that journey I did. So overall though, what did I learn? The big thing that I did learn is that best practices suck, right? So especially because that fourth stage is all about speaking to your users, right? And the 3 before tend to be inspired a lot by what other people did and the learnings that the wins that they had. The problem is that wins that other people have don't always translate to you. So I would say best practices suck. In fact, at Hotjar, we've kind of decided that best practices are enemy number 1 to us. And the biggest problem with best practices is there's many bloggers out there, some of you might be you, right, on this webinar, that best practices are a great way to get traffic, right? But because of that, there are many people just shipping out best practices just to make you click and read and share and all that stuff. But in reality, applying what's good for someone else is not necessarily good for you. It's good to keep that in mind. Second, there is too much data. Just because we sit in a digital world, there's so much data that you can be looking at. But just because you can look at that data doesn't mean that you should. So today we're going to look at, more than anything, where do you start? What to prioritize on, and don't let the data own the journey. Instead, you own the journey based on the conversation you're having with your users, and the data is there to help you get along in that journey. Third one, it's interesting coming from a CEO of a software company that sells software, right? Even though Hotjar is completely free, the best tools are free, and I'm not referring to Hotjar. Thank God there is no entrepreneur out there yet that has put a subscription around our eyes, our ears, our mouth, and our brains, right? But it's so many times overlooked. I meet so many times businesses that ask me, what should I do? And how are we going to solve this problem? And I typically always ask, when's the last time you actually spoke to your user or to your customer? And I'm always surprised that roughly 80% of the cases, it's never, or it's a very long time. So the one thing that I encourage you to do is that as optimizers, marketers, as analysts, our prime responsibility is to be in contact with our users, to speak to them, to observe how they are behaving. And I think it's easy for us to be lazy just because the data is available in Google Analytics and Hotjar and Mixpanel, to sit behind our desk and look at the graphs and the numbers. So the best tools are free. They are available to us, so let's use them. And then the final thing, what I learned, and I'm going to be sharing you with today, is that you do need to have a methodology. You cannot just wing it, right? There needs to be some kind of structure. And with you today, I'm going to share our methodology. Methodology is a big word. It basically means it's a way of looking at the world. It's a way of looking at problems. And this here is our methodology, which is, we think that every site primarily has three basic elements to it. It's one, why are people coming there, the drivers? Why are they leaving, abandoning, the barriers? And 3, the hooks. What is making people convert? But we're going to jump into that later on. Okay, so these are the things that I learned, and now we're going to jump into those 5 steps. So number 1, we talked about empathy, right? And I said, it doesn't sound very sexy, but what do we mean exactly by empathy? Empathy is literally this process of using these these assets which are available to you for free and literally becoming your user. When you are completely empathetic with your user, you're literally becoming them. And as you can imagine, once you become the user, that is where the fireworks start to happen. That's where you can make decisions that can skyrocket the growth of your company or your site. Because if you don't truly understand your user, there is a risk that you're making short-term gains on your pages, but then that will not lead you in the right direction. So here are the tips that I have for you on how you can become your user. So what I love to do myself is actually I have it in my calendar to immerse myself. Obviously, I'm the CEO of Hotjar, right? So I want to be empathetic with Hotjar. That I immerse myself in Hotjar. So what I do is I literally try and clear my mind. It's like meditation, really. And I go to hotjar.com and try and use the site with a fresh mind, as if it's the first time I'm using it, and I record myself doing it. And as I'm going along, I'm very vocal, and I note down any observations, and this makes it very easy to go back to the team and say, hey, look what's happening here, which is very different than going to your colleagues or to your team and saying, oh, I was on the pricing page and then I got confused by this. Again, they cannot empathize with you suddenly, right? So recording your experience allows you to have that proof, a weapon to have your team empathize with you. And there's a couple of tools I recommend to do that. So ScreenFlow on Mac is great at recording. On ScreenFlow, what I love about ScreenFlow is the fact you can also record your face. So you can have the screen and your video next to each other. And Jing on both PC and Mac do a great job, but you don't have the video aspect. The second thing you can do is recruit a panel, right? So there are companies like user testing, where these people tend to be quite experienced. So obviously they're not exactly your typical user, but they will come in there with a very critical mind and tear your experience apart, which is what you want, right? So this is extremely good. The only caveat I would mention here is that it's very important that you explain to people who are doing this from a panel point of view who your typical user is and what type of mindset they're coming to your site with, right? So just to put them again in their shoes. And yeah, in terms of recruiting a panel, which is even more effective, rather than kind of going through user testing and using their panel, is to use something like Hotjar, or there's other tools where you can kind of incentivize your visitors to basically put in their details, sign up, and then you can jump on a Skype call and literally just have them screen share and go through their experience, and you can observe them. And then obviously, besides that, you can also record your own users, right? Now, this becomes slightly more quantitative, right? Because with tools like Hotjar, you're actually recording what they're doing, but you're not seeing what they do, right? So this is what it would kind of look like if this plays. Will it play? No, it's not going to play. So basically, in a recording, you'd see that cursor here that we have in yellow there would be moving around the screen, and you can literally see how your users are interacting with your site. Now, this is great because you can see many sessions at one go, and it allows you to empathize just by the volume. But the problem is here, you can't hear them kind of comment about the experience. So again, ideally, you combine many of these tactics together. And one thing that we like to do, again, because you want to then share this with the team, is you drop down comments in here so that you can very easily go back and find like observations you've made, and also tagging them so it's easily, again, shared with the team. And an example of a company that did this, they did this very early on with Hotjar, was PrestaShop, right? Many of you have probably heard about this e-commerce company. But basically, they used Hotjar to kind of analyze how people were, literally visualize more than analyze, how people were using this new beta that they had just launched. What was interesting was that they discovered that they had this page, which they thought kind of was working, but down there you can see there's create a new store, get started. And through their recordings, they were able to identify that many of their users were actually just creating a new store as soon as they had finished a new one, just because it was down there. And that allowed them to kind of redesign this page. But even though at PrestaShop, they have product managers, UX designers, UX researchers, again, it's critical for them to empathize because it's so easy to miss something very obvious. Until you sit into your user's shoes, it's very easy to miss these things. So the most important thing here is empathize and then share with the team. But it's really important that you do capture. And this is literally the type of reaction you will have from your team. I do this on a periodic level, right? Analyze, look at recordings and share them with the team. I know I'm a CEO and I shouldn't do it, but I think that it's really important for me, one, to use Hotjar myself, and two, to empathize with our customers and users. This is literally more what it looks like. The team at Unbounce use recordings and heat maps with Hotjar. The fact that they can spend some time sharing with the team is very powerful to bring everyone on board with the challenges that are being faced. So, to summarize, the first step towards optimizing your site is to see it through the eyes of your users. I cannot emphasize this more. Again, you saw that within the context of my evolution, which is, this is kind of, again, the fourth step, literally getting to know your users, and then you can really make those kick-ass decisions, which will give you big wins. So step number 2, find your biggest barriers. We talked about finding the leaky hole in your bucket, right? But essentially, you'll notice, and I think many of you have heard this term funnel, right? So Google Analytics uses funnel. It's used by many CRO experts and many events. But the whole concept of funnel has always been a little bit frustrating to me, honest, because I always think, okay, so if 10 people are going into a funnel, right? This whole concept of explaining it with the symbol of a funnel. If 10 are going into the funnel and 1 converts, where the hell have the other 9 go? So in a way, that's the whole idea of maybe they've overspilled or maybe there's a hole, but I actually like the whole idea of instead using a treasure map instead. So in a way, when you are building or optimizing a site, I like to think of us as kind of designers of treasure maps, right? So when you think about it, a site has a sequence of steps. If you're selling something, you've got a search, you've got the results, you've got the product pages, then you've got the checkout. So in a way, it's like you have a treasure map and you're leaving clues or kind of cookies kind of on the trail to hopefully get your users from point A to point Z, right? And the better you design this treasure map, the more they get to that final point. The problem is that with like any event and any site, it's obviously going to get a lot of drop-offs by people who are just like, I don't have time for this, or I give up, or I don't have enough clues to get me to the next step, right? So essentially, the whole idea of the treasure map and with a funnel is that you want to literally speak to your users to understand why are they dropping off at certain points so that you can better understand how you can improve those clues and maybe skip certain steps or maybe add a step so it's much more obvious how to get to that final stage. So the key thing here is that if you have not designed your site with like this treasure map mentality in mind, then take a few steps back and think about it. And if you do have one, then I would ask you, where are people mainly dropping off, right? So it's really important that you know the data for each step. Now, if you do not have a funnel, Google Analytics has user flow, which actually kind of is showing you how well people are moving across this treasure map. So I would say this is probably one of my favorite tools in Google Analytics, because by setting a goal page or by setting a source, you can see how people are moving around the site. This is very powerful to see like how the treasure map is performing. And then equally, it's very important to have a well-defined funnel. So users might move around your site in a different way than you designed it, but it's critical that once you know my treasure map has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps, that you see where are you getting the most drop-off points. So in this example, we were shocked to see that we had the biggest drop very early on in our treasure map, right? So with Hotjar, our treasure map is trying to get people to sign up, then onboard, and then get them to the dashboard. This is our kind of sign up treasure map. But we found that most people were getting scared off by that first step. in the registration. So that was interesting, right? And we obviously wanted to find out why. And we'll look at that very soon. But besides that, in Hotjar, you can also click on the Watch and Learn button that allows you to look at those recordings we looked at the sample at earlier on. That's very powerful because it allows you to empathize at that stage. Now, when you're looking at recordings of people that are abandoning at a step, obviously the problem is going to be the other way around, right? It's not qualitative like you're speaking to 5 people. Now you're going to have suddenly thousands of recordings. So one tip that I give to you is sort by the number of pages and the time on the site, because this allows you to see people that are probably much more engaged and are having much more problems because there's probably more activity moving back and forth. That's at least where we typically find what we call these golden nuggets of why people are getting stuck. Might be that they're frustrated. It could be a bug. It might be something's not working as you thought it might be. Yeah, we always get typically these shocked reactions to what our users discover. So to summarize the step, optimizing is a prioritizing game. So many teams fail to see this. It's so easy to start working on areas which are really unimportant in the treasure map, or because there is no treasure map designed, you're optimizing an area that is not going to impact the big numbers. So always start with the biggest holes in your funnel, right? What we talked about, the biggest holes in your bucket. So step number 3. So now that we've identified these biggest holes, these key pages, right? What do we do with these pages? How do we go about identifying what the problems are? So I like to use a lot the whole concept of connect the what and the why. It's useless to know what is happening if you do not know why. And really, this is the whole reason why we built Hotjar. It's the reason why in Hotjar there are tools that are analytics and feedback. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you have to use Hotjar. There are other tools that are kind of split out. We kind of brought these tools together in a way with Hotjar, but you can use any other tools that give you the same impact. So now that you've drilled down on a page level to a problem, I like to go more in detail with a what. I've seen some recordings of people interacting with this page, but this is the ideal time to do a heat map. And this is very different from, let's say, jumping directly and just doing heat maps, right? Which is what most users do. So there is a sequence. We've empathized, we found like where is the biggest problem, and now we're zeroing on a specific page. And a heat map gives us aggregate behavior for a lot of users on the page. And this is important because we can now see patterns. So now I can know from 5 or 10,000 interactions, most people are interacting with one specific part of the page. And here I have one example for you. Our visitors were interacting a lot with one specific part of our pricing page, which was very curious to us, right? You see that red part there. And that is actually text that talks about our sample rate or data collection rate. So essentially, how many page views Hotjar is collecting data from. Now, together with that, we also asked the question, is our pricing clear? If not, what would you change? And that is the why. What was interesting was that we found that in the responses, 80% of our users were talking about something completely different than the sample rate. They were talking about what we call a snapshot size or report size. And this was really a fundamentally kind of pivoting moment for us, because we realized, thanks to this, that our users were confusing 2 terms together, and we had never realized at this point. And then we followed up with some interviews and spoke to users, and we confirmed this hypothesis. And this has drastically changed the way kind of we moved ahead with the business. So we're changing literally the way we collect data, the way we monetize it. So it's been a really critical moment for us. So again, we would not have realized this had we only looked at the heat map or had we only looked at the poll. And later on, we're going to look at some examples of questions I suggest to ask on polls. So basically, thanks to this, we embarked on this new pricing page that we now have live, which took into consideration all this amazing feedback that we got and like the behavior and the heat map and the input we got on the poll, and this in a split test gave us a really, really nice win. I think it was around 10% lift in signups and even more in terms of ROI, so LTV, because we shifted more people to the higher plan by allowing them to self-segment. So here are some of the favorite questions we like to ask based on the heat map activity we see. So where you see a lot of, let's say, activity all over the page, it's good to ask, what's the purpose for visiting us today, right? So maybe you're not matching the experience with what they're trying to achieve. So by understanding this and then analyzing what are kind of the biggest buckets, what are the biggest segments of what are people trying to achieve, you can then model your page to match those biggest segments. So if most people are coming to this, I'm just going to throw out a reason, because they want pricing, then pricing should be much more clear and maybe give a call to action to get a quote. So interpret what you're seeing and ask questions based on the patterns you're seeing, but then go ahead and make changes based on the what and the why. Another example, where you're seeing lack of activity or a lot of activity on only one part of the page, ask, quick question, what's missing on this page? And by all means, don't limit yourself to one question, but again, explore and experiment, right, to see how you can try and understand or demystify the patterns that you see. And again, with the scroll heat map, if you're seeing a lot of people abandon very quickly, ask more generic questions. If you could change anything on this page, what would that be? And again, iterate between questions, see what people are saying. And then finally, look for patterns in your heat maps. This is actually what I presented about in the session when I visited in Tel Aviv, but you can also search for 8 heat map tests, and you can find, basically a guide about all these patterns and questions you can ask. So, to summarize this part about key pages, for the biggest wins, uncover both the what and the why of your user's behavior. It truly is the only way to get really big wins on these key pages. So, finally, and this is where it gets a little bit more advanced, right? Surveying customers, which is step number 4. We're going back to essentially that big picture we talked about before, right? So you have people coming to your site, and we looked at some of the poll questions we asked. Will hopefully allow you to start understanding what's bringing them to your site. With barriers, we're asking them questions which might highlight why they're leaving. But we haven't asked any questions to people that are actually converted. And in reality, it's really important to get this kind of big picture, because it's going to influence a lot of the decisions you're going to do with your site going forward. So here's how you can collect this information to get your big picture. So we looked before at an example of a funnel that we did for Hotjar, right? And I showed you some of the poll questions that we asked. So in this case, this is kind of what we call the big picture worksheet. So based on doing some polls, we already have some information, doing a funnel and doing some poll questions, we already have some information about our top 3 drop-off points and the top reason why. So you can see there you've got registration is the biggest drop-off point for us. And by asking questions, we realized time and value were the biggest reasons why people were leaving. So literally people were saying, we don't have time to do this. Like, I need to go back to work. Or what is the value I get out of it? It was interesting, time and value. That makes for some interesting split tests, right? But now we need to start populating the other areas. So the blue on the left and the green on the right. So the best way to do that is to actually send a survey to your customers. Now you might be asking, why are customers? Well, your customers are actually the most qualified people to give you awesome feedback. If you do a survey with people just landing on your site, there is a big chance that you are going to be getting input from people who maybe are not really your ideal customer, right? So by getting this input from your actual customers, you know it is rock solid, because these are people that are definitely qualified. So here are the questions that I recommend you include in a survey. For drivers, in one sentence, describe yourself. Example, I am a 36-year-old art marketer with a passion for disc golf, blah, blah, blah. Now, I like to do this very casual instead of like drop downs or multiple choice, because it's where you truly have the opportunity to get to know your users. Yes, it's more work to analyze these, but yeah, you get the biggest wins when you do a lot of work, right? So it's really important you invest the time to get to know your users and customers in a more casual way. And second question, what are the main challenges you face on a daily basis? Now, this is going to allow you to better segment your campaigns, to specialize and improve your copy, and make your landing pages more tailor-made to your ideal user, which is mimicking this on your customers. In terms of hooks, so the persuasion points, what was the one main factor that persuaded you to choose this? So it's interesting, for example, with Hotjar, the more we understand what is that one main factor, we can go back to that pricing page and overcome any objections by focusing on that one main factor, give it more visibility. And then 4, barriers, please list your top 3 biggest fear or concerns that nearly stopped you from using this. What nearly stopped you from converting? When you think about it, the sheer power of this is huge, right? This allows you to eliminate conversion killers, which really matter. Because if I asked on the page with a poll, why did you nearly not convert? I'm going to get unqualified reactions. So I might have users saying, yeah, I wanted the price to be lower. So I might be talking a lot about price, whereas my customers didn't even think about price. And their concern was trust. So I shouldn't have a landing page focused around pricing when that is the objection from my unqualified users. And instead I should be focusing on trust, because that is probably what most of my qualified users, leads on the site, are more concerned with. And then with regards to sending out the survey, many of you are probably thinking, oh, no one's going to answer this survey. People hate surveys. Wrong. You would be surprised that consistently, I've worked with many clients in many different industries. You always have people reply to surveys. The problem is that people with our mindset don't typically reply to surveys because we are the hackers, we are the optimizers, right? So we typically are not very attracted by surveys. But you'd be surprised, the response rate is always very good, and you have enough responses to formulate a strategy around. But there are some tips I will share with you. 1, incentivize. So give a prize that can be won. Give a deadline. But more importantly, if you're going to give a prize, you want to eliminate bias. You don't want them to think that the more nice replies you get, the bigger the chance they have of winning an iPad. So it's important to, on the right you will see there, I wrote, please be blunt and honest in your feedback. It's the only way we can improve Hotjar. So invite them to be blunt and direct with you. And I also wrote here, it's impossible to offend us. So it's really important to bring them in with the prize and then make them feel comfortable to be really brutal with you. So use that wording. And this works really well. And then having a reminder close to the deadline typically doubles your response rate. So it's really effective. And then in terms of getting the missing pieces, you then dump these results into an Excel sheet and you start tagging them, right? Start putting them into kind of into columns based on how you bucket them. And this is actually something interesting. We're looking to add this functionality into Hotjar in the future, so you don't need to do this in a spreadsheet. But again, the process of analyzing this manually, it really is priceless. This is true empathy here. So the more you read through them, you categorize them, you're going to have such a crystal clear idea of what you need to fix on the site. And it's going to be very easy for you to show examples to your team, your bosses, to your client, to persuade them what needs to be fixed. And this is an example, right? So this is the actual big picture worksheet we have at Hotjar, which we filled in. We keep this top of mind, like we keep this always, I literally invite the team to print this out and stick it up into their home offices, and we have this in our office as well. So we're always focused on what our key challenges are and the 3 aspects of our methodology. Great stuff. So here's an example of how you can use this. So in our case, we have built out this kind of big picture. And then I saw the funnel and I saw the biggest drop-off on the first step in the registration. I mentioned before we were shocked with it. And then I look at the page, right, and I record myself using it. And then I say, shit, now I get it, right? Because this is the point where I say, okay, so if they're concerned about value and time, we looked at that before, and I know our typical users are marketers with not a lot of time, and I know what their main challenges are. I'm going to take one step back. So the top challenge they face is time and too much on my plate, right? So the moment I see this is our sign up, right? We're not addressing these objections, and I can see how the design of the page does not make me feel like I'm going to solve for these problems. So we've now redesigned this completely to basically address this. So yeah, and there's just a reminder of that. And here's the redesign that we did. You can actually see it. It's now live since I did these slides, and it's completely rethought experience. Yeah, which is more focused on the value and walking them through and the reason why they should be doing it. So to summarize, if you cannot see the big picture, if you don't zoom out, you will fail to make the changes that really matter. You get stuck making these tweaks and hypotheses based on best practices or what your hunch or your gut tells you might work, but that means you're going to do a lot of tests, you're going to waste a lot of time, and you're not moving in the right direction. So, step 5, probably the reason why most of you stayed around, the quick wins. Hopefully not. But yeah, what are some of the quick wins I'd like to share with you? Things that you can just go out and do. So as I said, I'm pretty much against best practices, but there are some fundamentally key things that you can do which kind of apply to most sites and businesses out there. So the first one is build up commitment. Building up commitment works across pretty much any type of organization, any type of business. And I'll show you a tip of how to do that. B, how to leverage your social proof. You've probably seen this quite a lot before. C, which is surprising, kill stuff. I've been lucky enough to speak to some of the most famous and biggest conversion rate experts in the world. And time again, I ask them, like, what's the one thing you should do? And they say, kill stuff. And D, give a reason why. As humans, we typically just need a reason why I should do something, and that helps me to do it. And I'll show you a couple of examples of that soon as well. Great, so build up commitment. So let's start by looking at the opposite. This is an extreme, right? And I hope that none of you have a form like this nowadays. But this is kind of the opposite of commitment, right? When you see something like this, you have literally killed any form of commitment I have with your site. Because I'm like, this is the last thing I want to fill out. So the opposite of that is thinking about how you can convert a form into more like a interactive kind of survey in a way, right? So instead of having a drop down, I can have a progress bar and I can have selections. This is something I did for a client of mine a long time ago. And this helped us get something in the region of a 20% uplift in signups. Similarly, I did this for another client back in the day. I broke down like an 8-step form into multiple steps, and I added information around it. And yeah, this helped us again build up commitment by getting them to first fill out the 3 easiest fields. So I put the 3 easiest first, and then put more of the work on the second step. And a great book to read about the elements of commitment and how to build it, and the kind of the theory behind it is this amazing book, Influence by Cialdini. Highly recommended for anyone in this space. Leverage social proof. So this is a no-brainer for most of us. We've heard it time and time again. But the one thing I want to mention with you today is to use specificity, right? So this is what we had on our site quite some time ago, which is, in our case, since we have a high range, we specified that we have startups to Fortune 500, and then we use the actual numbers. So the more you go specific, 119669 is much more credible than 1200, or a lot of people kind of round it up. So avoid doing it and adding countries. So the more specific you are with your social proof, the better. If you don't have social proof, then go out there and get it, right? Get featured on some publications and lend some of their social proof. But more importantly, I'd say actually having quotes from actual users is incredibly powerful. But it's really critical that you choose people that are truly leaders here. So this can backfire, right? So if it's literally nobody's from no brand, that can actually backfire because there is such a thing as negative social proof. So highly recommend that you read the book by Cialdini. Basecamp used to do this incredibly well on this page. I think they changed it now, but it's again very specific, and they also back it up by linking to some of their documentation. Killing stuff, right? I said time and time again, I always get this. The biggest, some of the most, well, not biggest, the quickest wins come from just removing stuff. So if your users are not interacting at all with stuff on heat maps and recordings, and in your polls and in your surveys, you're finding that there is no reason to have that content, remove it. Just by having more white space and just by having more clarity, that is incredibly powerful in terms of giving more focus to what is interesting to them. Yeah, this is another example, right? In this case, the company had this huge banner. Like, who wants to see a banner? I just want to remove this and see, like, maybe have the search more prominent and show me the popular categories and bestsellers, right? So yeah, remove stuff. Give a reason why. With Hotjar, for example, we have a friend referral program, but we make it a point to kind of give a reason why they should do it. And in the beginning, when we launched Hotjar, we explained why does Hotjar exist? What is our purpose? Intercom do this really well as well on their site with this kind of positioning that they do. So it's really important. If you're asking me for my phone number, why do you need my phone number? Give me a reason why. If you need my email, why do you need the email? If you're missing some information on your e-commerce site, why is it missing? If I have to buy in a certain way, or if you require me to do certain things, or shipping is charged a certain rate, explain why, and explain why you're doing it better than others. It's really, really important to give a reason why. Typically, just seeing a reason on our page eliminates any objections you might have with moving forward. Yeah, so that's pretty much everything I have for you today. So to summarize a little bit, I know that there was a lot, so it's nice to summarize in the end. The final takeaways. 1, become your users. Find your conversion killers, right? And the only way to do that is to become your users, empathize, record yourself, record them, speak to them. Focus on your biggest barriers first. You need to be ruthlessly focused on where you have the real problems. Stop optimizing things that don't make a difference. 3, connect the what and the why. Get those aha moments. That's really going to inspire you about tests or direction you need to take your site and the business. 4, take a step back and look at your big picture, right? See the whole thing before you start diving into small elements. It will inspire the small changes you make. Best practices suck, but make sure you've not missed on the quick wins we've talked about today. And then, yeah, give a shit, right? Which is, once you do have the feedback and insights you collect, actually act on it. I'll leave you with this small example. I was helping an e-commerce client that was selling bicycles. They're actually one of the biggest e-commerce bicycle sellers in the world. And we had them do some polls, and we found out that by asking users, like, what's missing on the page and matching that with heat maps, like, pretty much everyone said, wait. So I contacted the site owner, the optimizers, the team, and I said, hey, do you not have the weight of the bicycle? Because I bicycle myself. And if there's no weight on pages, then it's very difficult to choose the right bicycle. And they're like, yeah, no, we never got down to doing it. And I said, guys, this is a huge, huge opportunity for you. Because weight is so important, you should go over and beyond, not just listing the weight, but maybe create a guided system whereby you put in your weight, your personal weight, how you bicycle, whether it's sportsy or just for leisure, whether you have a lift or whether you have a garage, and basically recommend bicycles based on these factors. That's like taking it, creating the ultimate experience. The problem is this was like a year and a half ago, and looking at their site, they still don't have weights. So unless you give a shit and act on it, it's useless to discover what these problems are, right? So as optimizers, as owners, whatever our role is within organizations, our top priority is to go and solve problems for our users, because those are the big wins for both our users and for the business. And on that note, I'll stop if we want to spend any time for Q&A, Shaki.
Yeah, we have some questions. First of all, what should I do with a feed of articles? For example, unlimited scroll, infinite scroll website. So the heat map will not work.
So infinite scroll pages.
Yeah.
So that is obviously a challenge, right? So with infinite scrolling page, it's very difficult to do a heat map because you can't see the behavior because we can't capture the heat map in the first place. So what I would recommend is use recordings and annotate kind of your observations. I know it's not ideal, but I would also suggest you contact our team via support, because there are some things that you can do, but in terms of hacking it together. But at the same time, I would also question, if you are using infinite scrolling, like why would you want to look at heat maps, right? Because probably you want to see what people are interacting with on the page. So in that case, like I would focus more on the challenge you have and start asking questions via polls and match that with recordings, as opposed to focusing too much on heat maps. We see this time and time again. A lot of importance is given to heat maps, which is great. But again, especially if you have a technical like limitation there, don't let that get in your way. Start asking the questions first.
Okay. Second question, do you already support single page apps and React?
Yes, we do.
Okay. How far is relevant for existing customers?
Say that again. How?
How far? Number 4.
Number 4. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not the takeaways. The section before that.
Okay, so the section before that, section 4. You mean in the kind of the, are we referring to this survey to get the big picture?
I think so.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say probably it's even more relevant in business. Definitely. So we use this. We use this a lot. I see the question. How is number 4 relevant for existing customers?
Yeah.
Yeah. Surveys only work with existing customers, right? That's the only place where it really works. But maybe Vicky, if you're still around, maybe follow up with, maybe make it more clear what you meant by that question.
Okay. What's the difference between Hotjar, Sport, and Survey? Which of these tools are better for what kind of insights?
Great. So polls are great when you have a specific challenge with a page. So like I showed before, in the funnel, you have a lot of people dropping off at one point. Then you zero in with a heat map and a poll. So a poll is great to kind of, in a way, interrupt a little bit someone during the experience to ask them questions. Surveys are much better to ask more questions at the end of the experience. So that's why we use surveys with customers and we use polls mid-experience. Okay, I think we finish here. Thank you so much, David. That was super interesting. I would even dare to say mind-blowing. I would like to remind everyone that we are 45 days before the conference, and if you participated this webinar, we give you a 10% discount for the next 48 hours. I will send you the link after we finish the webinar. And David, I don't know if you know, but my Hotjar account ID is 120.
3, I think. I was one of your first users, and now we have more than 50,000.
Yeah, man, you are a pioneer, Shaki.
Yeah.
Seriously. Well, we really are like thankful to those early users because you guys took the biggest risk with Hodja, right? Very early on. So yeah, thanks a lot for your support, man. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you very much, David.
Anyone who wants the slides, just follow me on Twitter and hit me up, and I'm more than happy to send them to you.
Do you want me to send it to everybody?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I will send it in the mail.
You mean the slides?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd much rather if they reach out and I send it personally.
Okay, great.
I don't want putting them too much public.
Yeah.
Because I just remove some slides that are for some of our clients in there.
Sure.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Shuki, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you. Bye everyone.